The forest was silent except for the sound of snow cracking under heavy boots. The night had fallen hard, wrapping the world in ice and wind. The old pines bent under the weight of white frost, and every breath turned into a thin cloud that vanished too soon. In that frozen wasteland walked Elias, the human woodcutter. His coat was torn, his beard thick with frost, and his hands red from the cold. He had spent the last hour cutting logs, trying to gather enough wood to last through the storm that was coming. He had lived alone for many winters on this alien planet called Vareth, far away from the human colonies. The world was quiet here, untouched and cruelly cold. Elias liked it that way. No wars, no soldiers, no noise. Just him, the fire, and the sound of trees breaking under the axe. But tonight something felt wrong. The air carried a strange sound, soft, trembling, almost human. Elias stopped, turning his head. At first he thought it was the wind. Then it came again, a weak cry, small and frightened. He frowned, his breath catching in his chest. Out here no one should be. The nearest village was 20 miles away, and yet that sound was real. He followed it through the trees, his boots sinking deep into snow. The forest seemed to whisper around him, the icy branches groaning as he moved. Finally he reached a clearing. There, near a fallen log, two small figures huddled together beneath a dead tree. Their skin glowed faintly blue in the moonlight. Their clothes were thin, their bodies shaking violently. Elias froze. They weren't human. They looked like children, thin, fragile, but their faces had faint lines of silver running along their skin like veins of light. Their large eyes blinked up at him, glowing softly, filled with fear. One of them tried to speak, but only coughed weakly. The other reached out a trembling hand and whispered, "Please." Warmth. Elias's heart pounded. His first instinct was to step back. Humans and aliens didn't mix, not since the border war that took half the colony lives. Everyone said aliens couldn't be trusted. But looking at them now, two tiny shapes shaking under a frozen sky, he didn't see enemies. He saw children dying in the cold. He took off his thick cloak and stepped closer. "Don't be afraid," he said quietly. His voice was rough from years of silence. "You'll freeze if you stay here." The older twin flinched when he bent down. She had silver hair that clung to her face, and her eyes reflected the fire of the stars. The younger one hid behind her, too weak to move. Elias wrapped them both in his heavy coat. For a moment the snow around them shimmered, and he felt something strange. A faint pulse of energy, like his body heat was being drawn away. He gasped softly, but didn't let go. "You're freezing. Come on." He lifted the smaller twin into his arms, light as a bundle of twigs, and helped the other stand. The moment he touched them, the frost on the ground began to melt around his boots, a thin fog rising in the moonlight. It was unnatural, but there was no time to question it. As they walked back to his cabin, the forest grew darker. The storm was moving in fast. Snow started to fall in heavy flakes, and the wind howled like angry ghosts. Elias pushed forward, shielding the twins under his arm. Inside his small wooden cabin, the smell of smoke and pine filled the air. He laid them near the old fireplace and threw in more logs. The flames burst alive, painting the walls with gold and orange. The twins curled close together, shivering. Elias handed them an old blanket and sat by the fire, watching. Slowly, color returned to their blue skin. The younger one coughed again and whispered, "Why? Help us?" Elias stared into the fire. He wasn't sure how to answer. "Because someone should," he finally said. "No one deserves to die in the snow." For a few moments, the only sound was the crackle of wood and the soft breathing of the two aliens. The warmth seemed to calm them, but Elias noticed something strange again. The fire's heat was fading faster than usual, as if the room was swallowing it. The air turned colder, the flame shrinking slightly. He leaned closer, frowning. The older twin met his eyes. "We can't control it," she whispered. "We take heat when we're afraid." Elias blinked, not understanding at first. Then it clicked. They were absorbing warmth to survive. That's why their kind was feared. That's why people called them cold eaters. He didn't move. He could feel the chill in his bones, but he didn't step back. Instead, he fed the fire again, stronger this time. "Then don't be afraid," he said softly. "You're safe here." The younger twin looked up, tears forming in her glowing eyes. She whispered something that made the fire flicker. "They'll come for us," she said. "If they find us here, you'll die too." Elias stared at her, unsure if she meant humans or something worse. Outside, the wind howled again, louder this time. Somewhere in the distance, a faint metallic hum echoed through the storm, like the sound of a machine searching in the dark. He stood and looked out the window. The snow was falling hard, but beyond the trees he saw a faint red light blinking, steady, moving closer. The twins' small hands clutched the blanket tightly. Elias turned back to the fire, his jaw tight. Whatever was coming, it wasn't the storm anymore. The storm outside grew wilder through the night. The wind screamed against the wooden walls of the cabin, shaking them like an angry beast. Inside, the small fire burned low, throwing a weak orange glow over the room. The twins lay close together on the floor, wrapped in Elias's blanket, their blue skin now pale silver in the firelight. Elias sat near the fireplace, rubbing his hands together for warmth. He had given them everything, his coat, his food, his fire, and yet the room still felt cold, like the frost had followed them inside. His breath came out white even though the flames licked the air just a few feet away. He glanced at the fire again. It didn't look right. The wood was dry, but the flame was small, slow, tired, as if something invisible was stealing its life. Elias leaned forward, poking the fire with a stick. Sparks flew, but they died instantly. Behind him, a soft voice broke the silence. "We're sorry." Elias turned. It was the older twin, her large silver eyes open now. "Sorry for what?" he asked, frowning. The younger one stirred beside her and whispered, "We take heat when we're scared. We can't stop it." Elias blinked, unsure if he'd heard right. "You take heat?" The girl nodded, her voice shaking. "Our bodies pull warmth from everything, fire, air, even people. That's how we live. That's why they hunt us." Elias stared at them, the truth settling in like a stone in his chest. The stories he'd heard back in the colony came rushing back. Cold eaters, the soldiers had called them. Creatures that could drain the life from a man with one touch. Dangerous. Unnatural. But looking at these two frightened children, he couldn't see monsters. Only victims. He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "You can't help what you are," he said quietly. "And I can't let you freeze to death either." The twins looked at each other, surprised. Most people ran from them. This human didn't. Elias threw more logs into the fire. The flames rose for a moment, filling the cabin with light. He took off his gloves and moved closer, trying to warm the twins' hands. Their fingers were cold like polished stone. The older twin, still cautious, whispered, "You'll get sick if you stay near us." Elias chuckled softly, shaking his head. "I've been through worse winters." He looked at the fire again and smiled faintly. "Besides, you two don't look that scary." For the first time, a tiny smile appeared on the younger twin's face. Her sharp little teeth glimmered in the light. She leaned against her sister, her eyes slowly closing. Minutes passed. The storm roared outside, but the cabin stood firm. Elias watched over the sleeping twins. Something deep inside him stirred, a strange feeling he hadn't known in years. He'd lost his family long ago, burned in a raid when the border wars began. Since then, he'd lived alone, never expecting warmth again. Yet now, with these alien children under his roof, that emptiness seemed to fade a little. He reached for his flask of water and took a sip. The metal was freezing. As he set it down, he noticed something outside the window. A faint red flash, then another. He frowned and stood, walking to the frosted glass. The forest was dark, but in the distance through the snow a dim red beam moved slowly from side to side. Searchlights. His pulse quickened. He turned sharply. "You said they hunt you," he whispered. "Who's they?" The older twin sat up instantly, her silver eyes wide with fear. "Guards," she said. "From the facility. They made us." "We escaped," Elias's stomach dropped. "You escaped from humans?" She nodded, tears forming. "Humans who play with life. They called us projects. They said we weren't real." For a moment, Elias couldn't speak. He'd worked in colonies before. He knew what human greed could do. Creating life, then calling it property. It made his blood boil. He turned off the small lantern near the window. "You have to stay quiet," he said firmly. "Don't move." The younger twin woke up, sensing danger. She clutched her sister's arm tightly. The fire dimmed even more, reacting to their fear. Elias took his axe from the corner of the cabin and stepped to the door. The sound of crunching snow came closer, metal boots moving in a slow line. Through the narrow gap in the door, he saw shapes in the blizzard, 3 figures tall, armored, carrying glowing scanners. The light swept across the forest, painting the trees in red and white. Elias's heart pounded. His cabin wasn't hidden well. If they came closer, they would see the smoke from his chimney, the heat from his fire, the footprints in the snow. He crouched low and whispered to the twins. "Hide under the floor." The older one hesitated. "They'll kill you if they find us." Elias looked at her with steady eyes. "I've been ready for death a long time." He moved a small wooden panel near the corner of the cabin and helped them crawl under it. The space was dark, tight, and cold. He covered the hole with the rug again. Outside, the footsteps stopped. A voice called through the storm, metallic and harsh. "Heat signature detected. Cabin ahead. Move in." Elias gripped his axe, his jaw tight. The doorknob rattled once. Then again. The woodcutter's heart thundered. He stood silent beside the fire, ready. The door shuddered under a sharp knock. The sound cut through the howling storm like a blade. Elias froze beside the fire, his hand tightening on the axe handle. The room was dark except for the flickering orange glow. Beneath the wooden floor, the twins held their breath, clutching each other, their tiny fingers trembling. "Open up!" a voice commanded from outside, metallic, cold, and full of authority. "This is Patrol Unit 9. We detected life signs inside. Identify yourself." Elias didn't move. His heartbeat pounded in his ears. He took a slow breath, wiped his sweaty hands on his trousers, and finally stepped toward the door. He opened it just a crack. Snow burst inside, carried by the furious wind. 3 figures stood outside in heavy metal suits, glowing red visors cutting through the dark. Their weapons were long, spear-like, humming faintly with energy. The leader tilted his head. "Human settler," he said. His voice filtered through his helmet. "We're tracking 2 alien fugitives. Seen anything unusual?" Elias forced a calm expression. "Just me," he said. "Been out cutting wood since dawn. Haven't seen a soul." The soldier looked past him into the cabin, his scanner sweeping side to side. The light stopped near the fireplace. "Strange," the soldier murmured. "Your fire burns weak, but the heat readings are high. That doesn't match." Elias's grip tightened on the axe. He stepped slightly to block the soldier's view. "This old place leaks heat," he said quickly. "Wind keeps it trapped under the floorboards." The second soldier took a step closer, boots crunching on the snow-covered porch. "Mind if we come in?" Elias hesitated. "You'll let all the warmth out," he said with a half-smile. "Storm's bad tonight. Don't risk it." The leader ignored him and pushed the door wider. Snow swept in like smoke. The soldiers entered, their armor gleaming in the firelight. Elias stepped back slowly, his heart pounding like thunder. Their scanners beeped again, louder this time. The leader frowned. "Something's wrong." "The signal's here, directly below us." Elias's stomach turned to ice. Beneath the floor, the twins could hear every word. The older one pressed her sister's mouth shut, tears rolling silently down her cheeks. One soldier stomped his boot on the floor, thud, hollow. Another hit it with the butt of his spear. The sound echoed. "There's a cavity here," he said. The leader raised his weapon. "Step aside, human." Elias forced a grin. "You think I'm hiding fugitives in my floor?" "That's ridiculous." The soldier didn't smile. "Move." Elias stood his ground. "No." The leader raised his weapon higher. "Don't make this difficult." The air felt thick, the fire nearly dying. Elias could feel the twins' fear beneath the boards. The temperature dropped sharply as their bodies pulled in heat. His breath came out in clouds. He could almost hear their quiet sobs below his boots. He swallowed hard. "You people always come barging into homes, don't you?" he said quietly. "Can't leave a man in peace even at the edge of the galaxy." "Final warning," the soldier said. "Step aside or we'll burn through it." Elias looked him straight in the visor. "Then you'll burn through me first." For a second, no one moved. Then, without warning, one of the soldiers shoved Elias aside and raised his weapon to strike the floor. Elias moved faster. He swung his axe in a wide arc, knocking the weapon out of the soldier's hands. Sparks flew as metal hit the ground. The other 2 soldiers shouted and reached for him, but Elias had already lunged forward. He slammed his shoulder into one, sending him crashing into the wall. "Human idiot!" the leader shouted, pulling his sidearm. A blue blast of plasma shot across the cabin, burning a hole in the wooden wall. The fire roared higher, feeding on the oxygen rushing in. Elias ducked, rolling behind the table. His hands trembled, his mind racing. He knew he couldn't win this. Not against armor, not against plasma weapons. But he couldn't let them find the twins. Suddenly, the floorboards glowed faintly blue. A thin mist rose from the cracks. cold vapor spreading like breath. The soldiers hesitated, confused. The temperature plunged so fast that frost spread over their metal boots. "What's happening?" one shouted. Elias looked down. The air around his legs sparkled with white light. The twins were doing something, he didn't know what, but it was powerful. The soldiers began to back away, panic in their movements. The leader raised his scanner again, shouting orders into his comms. "Alpha target detected under the cabin. Freeze protocol now." Elias knew he had seconds. He jumped forward, grabbed the fallen spear, and smashed the control panel on the soldier's chest. Sparks flew. The soldier stumbled backward into the fire, his armor hissing from the heat. "Retreat," the leader barked, dragging his injured comrade toward the door. "We'll call in the ship." Within moments, the door burst open again, and the soldiers vanished into the storm, their red lights fading between the trees. Elias stood there, panting, the room filled with smoke and the smell of burning metal. His hands shook. He dropped the weapon and looked at the floor. Slowly, he pulled the rug aside and lifted the wooden panel. The two twins looked up at him, their faces pale, their eyes wide. Elias knelt, his breath still ragged. "It's all right," he said softly. "They're gone, for now." The older twin's lips trembled. "You fought them." "For us," Elias nodded. "Nobody deserves to be hunted." The younger twin crawled closer, touching his arm. Her hand was ice cold but gentle. "You'll die for helping us," she whispered. Elias gave a tired smile. "Maybe, but not tonight." Outside, the storm still screamed. But in the distance, through the whirling snow, a faint light rose into the sky, a dropship's beacon coming closer. The danger wasn't over. It had only begun. The storm had finally begun to fade, but the silence it left behind was heavier than the wind. Smoke curled lazily from the fire as Elias leaned against the wall, catching his breath. The fight had drained him. His ribs ached where the soldier's spear had struck, and the smell of burnt metal still filled the cabin. Under the floorboards, the twins stayed hidden, too afraid to come out. The older one, Lyra, held her sister tight. Every time the cabin creaked, both flinched. Elias knelt down and lifted the rug. "It's over," he said softly. "They're gone." Two glowing eyes stared back at him from the dark. Slowly, the twins climbed out, pale and shaking. Lyra's lip trembled as she whispered, "You shouldn't have done that." "They'll come back. They always do." Elias wiped the sweat from his brow and managed a weak smile. "Let them," he said. "I'm not afraid, but that wasn't true." Deep inside, he was terrified. He'd seen the ship lights outside before the storm swallowed them. The soldiers would call for backup. The next time, they wouldn't come quietly. He walked to the window and peered out. The forest was dark again, lit only by the faint moonlight bouncing off the snow. For a moment, the world seemed calm, too calm. Behind him, the twins whispered to each other in their strange musical language. It sounded like wind chimes mixed with sorrow. When Elias turned back, he saw that Lyra's sister had pressed her small hand to his wounded arm. A faint blue glow spread under her fingers. "Hey," Elias said gently. "What are you doing?" "She's healing you," Lyra said quietly. "It's her gift." Elias looked down. The cut on his arm was closing before his eyes, the pain melting away. "That's impossible." Lyra shook her head. "Not impossible, dangerous." Her sister finished and pulled her hand back, exhausted. The light faded. Elias flexed his arm. It was whole again, no scar, no blood. He didn't know what to say. "Why were you being hunted?" he asked finally. "Why would humans create you, and then try to destroy you?" Lyra's eyes filled with tears. "We were made in the labs under Mount Chorus. They said we could survive the cold, help colonize the frozen planets. But when we grew too strong, they feared us." Her voice cracked. "They said we were mistakes. They wanted to end us." Elias sat back, silent. The fire popped and crackled, filling the small room with sound. He thought about the wars, about how many lives had been lost because humans couldn't leave other beings in peace. He had seen greed turn good men into monsters. He sighed. "You're not mistakes," he said finally. "You're alive. That's all that matters." Lyra looked at him like she didn't believe it. No one had ever said that to her before. The younger twin tugged at Elias's sleeve. "You'll freeze," she whispered. "Our bodies." "Take your heat," Elias smiled faintly. "Then I'll keep the fire burning." He stood and threw another log into the fireplace. The flames rose higher, lighting their faces. For a moment, they looked almost human, two scared children clinging to the hope of safety. Then, outside, a faint hum filled the air. Elias froze. It wasn't the wind. It was mechanical. Heavy. A low vibration that rattled the cabin walls. The twins instantly tensed. "They're here," Lyra whispered. "The ship." Elias grabbed his axe and peeked through the window. Down in the valley below, lights moved between the trees, bright white beams slicing through the snow. Dozens of them. "They brought more," he muttered. The younger twin's eyes began to glow faintly blue again, a reaction to fear. The air around her shimmered, frost forming on the wooden walls. Elias turned to them. "Listen to me," he said firmly. "You need to stay quiet. If they see light from your eyes, we're done." Lyra nodded, covering her sister's face with her arm. "They won't stop," she whispered. "They want us alive." "Then we'll give them a chase," Elias said, pulling on his coat. He began moving supplies, pushing barrels, shifting logs, pulling up another section of the floor. Beneath it was a narrow tunnel leading out the back of the cabin. He'd dug it years ago as an escape route in case of raids. It led to the forest behind the ridge. Lyra stared at it, shocked. "You planned to run before?" Elias shrugged. "A man living alone has to have options." He looked out the window again. The soldiers were spreading out now, scanning every inch of the forest. One of the lights stopped, pointing directly toward his cabin. Elias turned back to the twins. "Go," he said. "Follow the tunnel until you reach the frozen stream. Then head north. You'll see the old mines. There are caves there. Hide until sunrise. What about you?" Lyra asked. "I'll make sure they follow me instead." Her eyes widened. "They'll kill you." Elias gave her a faint smile. "Maybe, but they won't touch you." For a moment, no one moved. The firelight danced across their faces, the tired human and the trembling alien twins. Then Lyra suddenly reached out and hugged him. Her skin was cold as ice, but the emotion was warm and real. "Thank you," she whispered. "No human ever helped us before." Elias gently placed a hand on her back. "Then let this be the first time." Outside, the hum grew louder. Snow began to fall again, thick and heavy. The lights of the patrols painted the forest in red and white. Elias watched them from the doorway, his axe gleaming in his grip. Behind him, the twins slipped into the tunnel, disappearing into the dark. He took a deep breath, straightened his shoulders, and whispered to himself, "Let's give them something to find." The door creaked as he stepped out into the storm, ready to face whatever came next. The snow fell heavier now, each flake glowing faintly under the lights of the patrol ships above. The night was alive with sound, engines humming, radios crackling, boots crushing through the frozen ground. Elias stood outside his cabin, axe in hand, his breath rising like smoke in the freezing air. The soldiers' red scanners swept across the trees, searching for movement, searching for life. He knew he couldn't win, but he could buy them time. Inside the tunnel, far beneath the snow, the twins crawled silently through the dark. Their pale hands brushed against the cold stone. The younger one whimpered, but Lyra pressed a finger to her lips. "Quiet," she whispered. "He's doing this for us." Back above, Elias stepped away from the door and began walking toward the trees. His boots sank deep in the snow. Every step echoed like a heartbeat in the silence between storms. He remembered the twins' faces, the fear, the trembling hope in their eyes. He'd seen that look before, years ago, when he was a soldier. Back then, it was his wife and child hiding in the firelight, whispering for him not to leave. He had left anyway, and he'd come home to ashes. That was the night Elias had sworn never to fight again. But tonight the universe had other plans. A voice called out through the snow. "There, human life form detected, 20 meters ahead." Elias gritted his teeth. He swung his axe once, cutting down a frozen branch beside him. It fell with a crash, drawing attention. Red beams turned toward him, slicing through the blizzard. 3 armored soldiers appeared, their visors glowing. The leader raised his weapon. "Identify yourself." Elias raised his hand slowly. "Just a woodcutter," he said. "You boys really think I'm worth all this noise?" The soldier stepped closer. "We tracked alien signatures here. 2 fugitives." "Where are they?" Elias shrugged. "Didn't see any. Just snow, trees, and a man trying to keep warm." The soldier's scanner beeped again, pointed at Elias's chest. "The readings are still hot." "They were with you," Elias smiled faintly. "Then maybe they're smarter than you think." The soldier's visor flashed red. "Take him." Elias moved before they did. He swung his axe in a blur, striking the side of the nearest soldier's leg. The blow dented metal and dropped the man to the ground. A blue flash shot through the air as another soldier fired. Elias dove aside, the blast burning through his coat and searing his shoulder. He rolled in the snow, gasping, and swung again. The axe slammed into the second soldier's arm, sparks flying as circuits broke. The air filled with smoke and steam glowing red and white under the falling snow. "Human down," one shouted. "Request backup." Elias knew he had seconds. He turned and ran toward the ridge behind his cabin. Each breath stabbed like knives in his chest. His body was heavy, but he pushed on, knowing every second counted. The soldiers followed, their boots pounding the ground. Behind the ridge, the forest opened to a frozen river. Moonlight gleamed off the ice. Elias skidded to a stop, panting hard. The cold wind bit deep into his wound. He looked up and saw lights moving through the clouds. A dropship was descending, its engines roaring like thunder. He smiled bitterly. Guess they're bringing the whole army. He gripped his axe again and turned to face the soldiers chasing him. His vision blurred, but he didn't back away. At that same moment, deep in the tunnel, Lyra stopped crawling. The ground shook above them. "They found him," she whispered. Her sister's eyes filled with tears. "We can't leave him," the younger one cried. Lyra hesitated. Every instinct told her to run. But something in her heart burned, something human. She looked toward the faint light of the tunnel's end and whispered, "He saved us. Now we save him." They crawled faster, emerging from the frozen stream just as the first explosion echoed across the forest. A blue blast lit up the sky. The twins ran through the snow, bare feet glowing faintly with energy. Their eyes burned bright, their fear turning into fury. Back on the ridge, Elias fell to one knee, coughing. The snow around him was red now. The soldiers surrounded him, weapons raised. "You should have stayed out of this, human," the leader said. Elias grinned weakly. "Maybe I should have, but I don't like bullies." Before the leader could respond, the air behind him shimmered with light. A sudden wave of frost rolled across the ground, spreading fast. The soldiers turned, shouting, "What is that?" Two small figures appeared through the mist, the twins, their eyes blazing blue. Energy pulsed from their hands like living fire and ice combined. The snow lifted in spirals around them, glowing as if alive. "Stop!" Lyra shouted, her voice echoing through the storm. The soldiers opened fire, but their blasts froze mid-air, the energy turning to glittering shards before reaching them. The younger twin raised her hands higher, and a wave of freezing wind swept across the clearing. The soldiers stumbled, their armor frosting over, joints locking. Elias stared in awe. The air itself shimmered. The twins were beautiful and terrifying all at once. Creatures made of warmth and winter, compassion and power. Lyra ran to Elias, kneeling beside him. "You shouldn't have stayed," she said, tears falling onto the snow. He smiled faintly. Someone had to keep the fire burning. The younger twin placed her hands on his chest, glowing light surrounding them. His breathing steadied for a moment. But he was too weak, his face pale, eyes half closed. "Go," he whispered. "Before more come." Lyra shook her head. "Not without you." The sky above rumbled as the dropship drew closer, lights bright as suns. Elias looked up at the descending fire and whispered, "Then you better run fast." The twins turned toward the forest, their eyes burning brighter than ever. They reached out to him one last time, two small hands glowing like stars, and vanished into the storm. Elias watched until their light faded. Then he turned back to the oncoming soldiers, raised his axe once more, and stood tall. If this was the end, he'd face it like a man who found something worth dying for. The forest was no longer silent. It was alive with chaos. The sound of engines roared from above, shaking the frozen trees as the dropship cut through the night clouds like a blade of fire. Its floodlights swept across the ground, turning the snow into silver and shadow. The wind that followed burned like heat, melting patches of frost around Elias's feet. He stood at the ridge, axe in hand, watching as soldiers poured out of the dropship like shadows given form. Their armor gleamed with light, their weapons drawn, their voices echoing through metal speakers. Target identified, human combatant and 2 alien subjects. Search radius 1 kilometer. Elias's body trembled with exhaustion. His coat was torn, his side bleeding again where the wound had reopened. Still, he stood tall. He had one purpose left: to lead them away. He looked toward the forest where the twins had fled. He couldn't see them now, but he could still feel their presence. Somehow the air still carried their warmth. "Run far," he whispered under his breath. "Don't look back." Then, gripping his axe tight, he turned and charged toward the soldiers. The nearest one didn't expect it. Elias swung hard, the axe striking the soldier's chest plate, sparks flying into the snow. The soldier fell back, stunned, and Elias pushed forward, slamming into another. He fought like a man who had nothing to lose because he didn't. But there were too many. Plasma fire sliced through the trees, lighting up the forest with blue light. Elias dove behind a fallen log, panting, snow melting from the heat of nearby blasts. "Human down," someone shouted. "Secure him alive. Command wants interrogation." Elias clenched his teeth. "Not today," he muttered. He grabbed a broken branch and tossed it into the fire nearby. The dry wood exploded in sparks. The soldiers turned toward the noise, just enough distraction for Elias to crawl into the shadows of the forest again. Every step was pain, but he pushed forward, deeper and deeper into the woods. Above him, the dropship's spotlight followed. Scanning, hunting. Suddenly, the night sky erupted with color. At first, Elias thought it was the aurora, the strange lights that sometimes danced on Vereth's frozen sky. But this was brighter, more alive. Streams of blue and white light surged upward from beyond the ridge, swirling like living fire. The trees shuddered and the air trembled with energy. Then he realized it wasn't the sky. It was them. The twins had stopped running. Far in the distance, a white-blue storm glowed behind the trees. It pulsed like a heartbeat spreading across the clouds. The soldiers froze where they stood, staring at it. Their scanners screamed warnings, unable to read what was happening. Elias turned wide-eyed. "No, girls, what are you doing?" he whispered. He stumbled toward the light, half running, half falling. His boots slipped on the icy ground, his breath burning in his throat. The air grew colder with every step, the snow rising in waves as if alive. When he reached the clearing, he saw them, Lyra and her sister, standing hand in hand at the center of a swirling storm of frost and fire. Their eyes glowed pure blue, their hair rising like threads of light. The ground around them cracked with thin lines of silver ice. "Stop!" Elias shouted over the wind. "You'll kill yourselves." Lyra turned her head slightly, tears streaming down her glowing cheeks. "They won't stop coming," she said. "We have to end it." The younger twin's voice was softer, broken by fear. "We don't want to hurt anyone, Elias, but they won't leave us alone." Elias took a step forward, the cold burning his skin. "You don't have to be weapons," he said. "You're not what they made you to be." Lyra's lips trembled. "Then what are we?" He pointed to his chest. "Alive. That's all you ever needed to be." The soldiers appeared behind him, their weapons raised. "Targets in sight!" one shouted. Before they could fire, a pulse of light burst from the twins' bodies. The forest exploded in color. Blue flames and white frost colliding, twisting into a storm that swallowed the soldiers whole. The air screamed. The trees shattered. Elias was thrown back by the force, tumbling into the snow. His ears rang, his body numb. When he opened his eyes, the world had changed. Everything around him glowed faintly blue, frozen mid-motion. Snowflakes hung in the air like glass. The soldiers stood still, trapped inside pillars of ice. Even the dropship above hovered motionless, engines frozen in time. At the center stood the twins, still holding hands, their faces calm now, peaceful, glowing with soft light. The storm had stopped, but they were fading. Elias crawled toward them, his limbs heavy. "No," he whispered. "Don't you dare disappear on me." Lyra knelt beside her sister, who was barely conscious. "We used too much," she said weakly. "Our bodies can't hold it." Elias reached them and took their hands, ignoring the cold burning his skin. "Then take mine," he said. "Take my warmth. Take everything you need." Lyra shook her head. "If we do, you'll—" "I already decided my fate," Elias said, his voice trembling. "You're not dying alone. Not while I'm here." For a long moment, no one spoke. The world stood still, the stars shining through the torn clouds. Then slowly the twins pressed their hands to his chest. Their glow grew brighter, spreading across him. The frost melted around them and the color returned to the forest. When the light faded, the dropship fell silent in the distance. The soldiers lay unconscious, frozen weapons at their sides. The storm was gone. The night was quiet again. Elias sat in the snow, breathing shallowly. The twins rested against him, their glow dim but steady. "You're safe now," he whispered. "They won't hurt you again?" Lyra smiled faintly, her voice soft as a whisper. Because of you. Elias looked up at the sky. The first hint of dawn painted it with pale gold. The storm had ended, but something greater had begun. Dawn crept slowly across the frozen horizon. The storm had passed, leaving behind a quiet world of silver snow and broken metal. Smoke curled from the wreckage of the dropship, its once bright engines now silent and still. The forest that had burned blue through the night was calm again, glowing faintly under the rising sun. Elias sat at the edge of the clearing, his back against a half-buried tree trunk. His axe lay beside him, blade cracked, handle blackened. His breath came out slow and shallow, each exhale a whisper in the cold air. He could barely feel his hands anymore, but he didn't care. He was still alive, and so were they. The twins rested beside him, curled under his coat. Their glow was weaker now, just a soft shimmer under their skin. They looked peaceful for the first time since he'd found them. Lyra stirred, blinking open her silver-blue eyes. "Is it over?" she whispered. Elias smiled faintly, though his face was pale. "Looks that way." The younger twin woke next, rubbing her eyes and looking around. She saw the frozen soldiers, statues of ice scattered across the clearing, and the sunlight dancing over them. "We stopped them," she said softly, almost in disbelief. Elias nodded. "You did more than that. You changed everything." Lyra looked at him closely, her expression turning sad. "You're hurt," he shrugged. "Just tired. Been a long night." She frowned, realizing the truth. The warmth he had left was fading fast. The energy he'd given them had saved their lives, but it had taken his strength with it. "Don't you dare," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Don't you dare leave us now." Elias chuckled weakly. "Can't leave. Someone has to teach you two how to chop wood." The younger one's eyes filled with tears. "Why did you help us?" He looked toward the dawn, his eyes reflecting the gold light. "Because once, someone helped me. I never forgot." Silence settled between them, soft and heavy. The forest began to wake. The distant calls of birds, the creak of trees bending in the wind. The warships were gone, the scanners silent. For the first time in years, the planet felt alive again. Elias leaned his head back against the tree, closing his eyes. The warmth that spread through him wasn't from the fire. It was from the tiny hands holding his. Lyra looked at her sister, then back at him. "We can give it back," she said suddenly. "The heat he gave us, we can return it." Her sister nodded eagerly, but Elias shook his head. "No, you need it more than I do." Tears froze on Lyra's cheeks. "Please let us try," he sighed. "You're stubborn, you know that?" The twins pressed their hands against his chest. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a faint blue light pulsed between them, warm and soft. It spread through his body like a heartbeat, melting the frost from his hair, bringing color back to his skin. He gasped as air filled his lungs again. The ache in his chest faded. He opened his eyes slowly, blinking in disbelief. The twins smiled through their tears. "You gave us warmth," Lyra said. "Now we give it back." Elias laughed quietly, a sound that carried through the cold morning air. "Guess I can't argue with that." They sat together for a long while, watching the sun rise higher. The light reflected off the frozen ground, turning everything into a sea of gold and silver. The broken soldiers glittered like statues, reminders of a battle that had ended not with hatred, but with compassion. Eventually, the younger twin spoke. "What will we do now?" Elias looked out across the valley. "We build," he said simply. "A cabin, maybe two. You'll need a home, a place safe from all this." Lyra tilted her head. "And you?" He smiled faintly. "I think I finally found mine." The girls leaned against him, quiet and warm. The sun rose higher, melting the last traces of frost. For the first time, Elias didn't feel alone. Far in the distance, the horizon shimmered. The frozen world of Vareth, once harsh and lifeless, began to thaw. Small rivers trickling through the snow, light bending off the ice like 1,000 tiny stars. Lyra looked up at him again. "Elias? Yeah?" She hesitated, then whispered, "What will people say when they find out a human saved 2 alien girls?" Elias smiled softly. "Maybe they'll stop calling us enemies." He looked toward the sky, where faint traces of blue fire still lingered from the night before. "Maybe they'll remember that warmth doesn't care where it comes from." The twins rested their heads on his shoulders. The fire of dawn wrapped around them, painting everything in gold. And as the light grew stronger, Elias closed his eyes, listening to the sound of the wind. For the first time in years, it didn't sound lonely. On a cold world where nothing should have lived, a human heart had burned bright enough to change it forever.